For 3 years, Larry and I lived together. We were top and bottom in the bedroom, boss and subordinate in the boardroom. It wasn't exactly a pure friends with benefits situation. Everyone in J City knew Chase, was a jealous, ruthless bastard. I crushed my rivals in business and kept Larry on a tight leash in our love life. Anyone who dared to hit on him met a nasty end. That is, until I saw him carry his first love, the one with the broken leg, back to our home, letting her come and go from his private spaces as she pleased. Suddenly, I was just over it. The night I left, I signed over my company shares to him and had my assistant pass on a message. I'm done playing. Congratulations on your upcoming wedding. Later, I was on a rooftop terrace at a karaoke bar, a cigarette in one hand and a cute boy in the other, when I saw Larry again. The indifferent mask on his face shattered. He stalked over, practically snarling with rage, and yanked me into his arms. This is the kind of trash you're into now? You sure you're done playing? Because I'm not. What now? A tropical storm had kept J City shrouded in clouds for days. Today, it finally broke in a torrential downpour, shutting down the subway. My assistant, Tina, had no choice but to bum a ride with me. I didn't mind. As I walked toward the underground garage, I heard Tina, a step behind me, speak cautiously. That Miss Nina and Larry really do seem close. They're always together at the office. Everyone's talking about them. Chase, are you? I looked up. In front of a black Maybach stood 2 figures, their bodies close. Larry opened the car door, his hand protectively on the roof until Nina was safely inside. Only then did he close the door. It wasn't just people at the company talking. The whole city of J City was waiting for me to become a laughingstock. Let's go, before the rain gets worse, I said, turning to open my own car door. I paused and glanced back. Take the passenger seat. Tina has been with me for years. She knows me better than anyone. She slid into the car, fully aware that this was Larry's usual spot. Chase, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe Larry responds better to a softer approach, you know? You don't always have to be so tough. When I didn't answer, she continued, besides, the grass isn't always greener. That princess has probably never lifted a finger in her life. And then there's you. Everyone knows you're the one who lands most of the company's biggest projects. Larry isn't stupid enough to throw you away for her. I didn't have to look to know her eyes were filled with pity. When people in J City talked about me, they either called me jealous or ruthless. No one could ever steal a project I had my hands on. Everyone knew that I was the tip of the spear that had made the LW Corporation a powerhouse that played in every circle, legal, illegal, and everything in between. But out of all those people, only this sweet, silly girl felt sorry for me. As expected, a woman's heart is always more tender. I put the key in the ignition and started the car. I watched the Maybach speed away before shaking off my thoughts and saying with a small smile, Larry knows I'm ruthless. He knows there's nothing I wouldn't do. He wouldn't dare throw me away. The heavy rain caused traffic jams. It took longer than usual to drop Tina off, and by the time I got home, it was almost 8 p.m. I pushed the door open to see our butler, Walter, directing staff to bring out hot dishes. The last plate was just being set on the table. Larry came downstairs in a set of comfortable loungewear. The steam from the food seemed to melt the cold, handsome lines of his face, giving him a warmer, gentler look. He seemed to be in a good mood. You're back late. Larry glanced at me, then casually picked up his chopsticks and started eating. When he noticed I wasn't moving, he frowned. Come and eat. I was silent for a moment, then handed my coat and briefcase to Walter and walked to the sink. The water ran over my fingers, my reddened fingertips trembling slightly under the stream. Larry would never say he waited for me to eat dinner. Those rare moments of tenderness were never spent on trivial things like this. He was usually only this nice to me in bed, after he'd had his fun. So today it was either that he'd also gotten home late or he had something to say. Thinking about what Tina had said and what I'd seen in the garage, I was leaning toward the latter. The food smelled incredible, but it tasted bland and flavorless. The weather had been bad lately, and Larry's throat was bothering him, so I'd specifically told Walter to make something light. Even though I knew he didn't like it, After just a few bites, Larry put down his chopsticks. I composed myself and slowly chewed a piece of bamboo shoot. Chase, I'm bringing Nina here to stay for a few days tomorrow. Her leg's in bad shape, and she needs someone to look after her. There it was. In the past 3 years, it wasn't like no one had tried to climb into Larry's bed, men and women alike. They all ended up getting dealt with by me and scurrying out of J City with their tails between their legs. But Nina was different. I knew she was the one that got away, a thorn in his heart. I'd forgotten that our whole relationship started as nothing more than a drunken mistake, one I later used to hold a debt over his head. Now, it was just a tangled mess of business interests. But I loved Larry. Over my dead body. Even his perfect composure couldn't hold. Larry shot up from his chair, leaning over me. His eyes were dark, his body radiating a cold fury. Chase, haven't you had enough of your drama these past 3 years? I'd heard worse. Did he really expect a flower to bloom from a rotting wound? I wasn't in the mood to argue with him. I listlessly put down my chopsticks and stood to leave. The next second, he grabbed me by the collar, stuck out a leg, and pinned me against the wall. The tightness at my neck seemed to squeeze all the oxygen out of the air. The feeling of suffocation made my face go pale. Walter, terrified, started to intervene, but a single glare from Larry sent him back. Seeing my nonchalant expression, he must have finally snapped. His voice was hoarse, his eyes tracing a path down my body before settling between my legs. A cruel smile played on his lips. Chase, you're a man. That's why you'll never compare to her. 2 men together, don't you find it disgusting yourself? What, you think you're going to have my kids? Huh? Can you even do that? As he spoke, his other hand tightened around my wrist, the pressure increasing as if he wanted to leave a permanent mark. A sharp pain made me wince slightly. Hearing the sarcasm in his voice, my mind didn't linger on it. Instead, my gaze went past him to Walter, who was watching anxiously. I instinctively offered a reassuring smile and said softly, Walter, please get Larry a glass of water. For a split second, the deep furrow in Larry's brow seemed to relax. The force in his hand, like a spear that had lost its target, suddenly didn't know where to strike. Taking advantage of his momentary confusion, I slipped out from his side, strode up the stairs, and went back to the bedroom. It was absolutely pathetic. Even after hearing him say those horrible things, all I could focus on was that his voice was hoarse. In the bathroom, I stood under the shower head, the water streaming down as I covered my face with my hands, the corners of my eyes turning red. What am I going to do? From the moment Nina came back, I knew. Larry was probably going to leave me. When I came out of the bathroom, Larry was leaning against the window, swirling a glass of red wine. Hearing the door open, he tilted his head, his gaze landing on me, heavy with drunken desire. I tightened the towel around my waist and walked toward the bed, ignoring him. As I passed, Larry grabbed my wrist. Before I could resist, he pulled me into his arms with a twist, pressing me back against the floor-to-ceiling window. The towel around my waist felt like it was about to fall off. The cold of the glass couldn't compete with the heat of his body. Larry's breath smelled of wine, the rich, sweet scent of grapes filling my nose. With just one sniff, I knew he was drinking the bottle of white wine I had given him. That being the case, the last thing I wanted was to hear him talk about Nina right now. So I cut him off. Larry, you wanna fuck? Larry frowned slightly, the darkness in his eyes shattering piece by piece under the force of his desire. I turned the tables, wrapping my arms around his neck. I pressed a cold kiss to the corner of his mouth, slowly moving sideways until I was nibbling and teasing at his ear. The next second, before I could pull away, Larry's hand was at the back of my head, deepening the kiss with a burning passion. He lifted my legs, pinning me firmly against the glass. The precariously tied towel slowly fell away during our embrace. Without its barrier, everything felt natural. As he moved inside me, I bit my lip, forcing back the moans caught in my throat. A thin layer of sweat slicked my temples. Larry's hand slid down my back, finally cupping my ass. Seeing the shocked tremor in my eyes, a triumphant smile spread across his face. His voice was a seductive whisper. Chase, what do you call me? Larry. Wrong. Larry. It was always like this. By day, he'd get angry if I even called him by his first name. But in bed, he insisted on indulging every last bit of his desire. I don't know if he had some kind of fetish, but when he heard me say his name, he actually laughed. The rain outside grew heavier. Through the glass, it sounded like a constant roar. The streaks of water on the windowpane turned into a solid curtain, washing the city clean and muffling all other sounds. The bedroom lights dimmed, then went out, leaving only a single wall lamp lit, casting two tangled silhouettes against the wall. It wasn't until I was completely spent, sobbing against his neck, that I heard him chuckle breathlessly. You're only ever this obedient at times like this. In the end, it was Larry who carried me back to bed. In a hazy state between sleep and wakefulness, I felt his palm stroking my waist a couple of times. My back stiffened, and I managed a hoarse whisper. Larry. He seemed surprised that I was still awake. Hearing my words, his hand froze. Then, his voice turned cold. It's nothing. Go to sleep. He turned over, and we spent the rest of the night in silence. After that night, the sun finally came out in J City. The feelings that had nearly rotted away in the damp darkness were nourished by the clear skies, sprouting new shoots. There was no time to argue with Larry. The next day, I had to fly out for a shipping project and was gone for nearly half a month, which also became the perfect excuse for our Cold War. Both Larry and I were stubborn, two kings who refused to bow. In the past 3 years, we'd had countless fights, big and small, and Cold Wars like this were nothing new. On top of that, this shipping project was the LW Corporation's first major step into the New Zealand market. I was so busy I barely had time to breathe, let alone worry about what was happening back home. I just assumed this was no different from all our other fights. That is, until I got off the plane, went straight home, and saw Nina sitting in a wheelchair in the garden, painting at an easel. When our eyes met, my brain short-circuited for a moment. Took me a full 30 seconds to remember what had happened that night. Nina was wearing a white dress, a paintbrush in her hand. Hearing the sound at the gate, she looked up with a joyful expression. But when she saw it was me, her eyes instantly filled with scorn. She smiled, her voice dripping with casual disdain. Chase, you're back. Too bad Larry's busy at the office right now. I rubbed my temples, which were throbbing from exhaustion. That lady of the house attitude would have gotten anyone else killed 1,000 times over on any other day. But Nina was different. She and Larry had a real history. She had left the country right when he loved her most, forever becoming the one that got away. It wasn't that I was afraid of making Larry angry, but the shipping project had just kicked off and he was about to be swamped. I didn't want him distracted by this kind of drama. Thinking about how Larry hadn't contacted me at all, it was clear he'd been busy hiding his new girl. Suddenly, I lost all interest. I couldn't even be bothered to keep up appearances. I looked down at her, a cold, empty smile on my face. If you don't want that leg to be permanently broken, I suggest you shut your mouth. She froze, then laughed mockingly. You wouldn't dare. If you did, Larry would never let you. You think I'm afraid? Miss Nina, didn't you already do your research on me? You know what I'm capable of. I tapped my fingers on my suitcase handle, the corners of my eyes aching with fatigue. Behave yourself. If I want your leg, Larry can't stop me. The house was in Larry's name. We had lived here together for years. Now, the trace of someone else's presence just disgusted me. I didn't even want to look at it. I turned, grabbed my suitcase, and strode toward the door, pulling out my phone to call Tina and have her send people to get my things. It took Tina and her team nearly an hour to pack up everything that was mine, just as I'd instructed. From the large humidifier in the bedroom to the small oil painting in the stairwell, even the rug under the coffee table, I didn't leave a single thing behind. Walter, watching this sudden upheaval, was getting anxious. He was just about to speak up when Nina's voice cut him off. Chase, don't forget anything. Surely a grown man like you wouldn't pull a cheap stunt like coming back for your things just to rekindle an old flame? You know, if a girl did it, it might be cute. But when it's a man who's been thrown away, it's just pathetic. She lifted her chin, her sweet, innocent face twisted with a hint of malice. She was clutching a broken paintbrush, the sharp edge cutting a small gash on her delicate hand, but she didn't seem to care. I was a little surprised, wondering where this sudden burst of courage came from. But the exhaustion from the overnight flight left me with no energy to play these childish games with her. As I turned to leave, Tina suddenly lost her temper. "You're the kind of person who's all talk. You couldn't satisfy a chia pet. You try to act like a boss, but everyone knows you're a joke. You try to play the victim, but you just end up fighting back. The only thing you're good for is being a pathetic, gold-digging homewrecker. You're living in someone else's house, so why don't you mind your own damn business? Does the garbage truck have to stop for you so you can get a taste?" Someone like Nina was no match for Tina's sharp tongue. Just those 2 sentences had her fuming, gasping for breath, with tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't want to waste any more time here. I motioned for Tina to follow me and said coolly, "The Nina family is a washed-up dynasty of has-beens. It's only natural that Miss Nina would be homeless and crashing at someone else's place. People like her always going on about love. She'll quiet down once her ego gets a reality check." If Tina's words were a critical hit, my last 2 sentences were like ripping out Nina's heart, coating it in rotten tofu, and throwing it in a cesspool. She looked like she wanted to explode on the spot, because I was telling the truth. The Nina family had gone bankrupt. Otherwise, she wouldn't have rushed back from overseas. Her latching onto Larry again was just a ploy to marry into the Hall family and get her hands on his investment funds. She might love Larry, sure, but the fact that she was after his money was undeniable. So all this talk about love was bullshit. Larry was just going to get played by her again. Serves him right, I thought. I moved back to my villa on the outskirts of the city. Larry had bought it for me with my first-year bonus when I just joined the LW Corporation. Tina wanted to hire people to help me unpack, but I stopped her. "Chase, with your looks and money, you could have anyone you want. Why are you still hung up on this one guy?" I knew what she wanted to say. Seeing the worry on her face, I managed a small smile. I pulled a large Jellycat Barcelona bear out of my luggage and handed it to her. "Bought this for you on my trip to New Zealand. I remembered you said you liked them." After she hugged the bear and thanked me excitedly, I said calmly, "My part of the shipping project is done. The rest will require Larry to handle the negotiations personally. I've sent all the files to your email. I'll spend this week finalizing the handover. Once I'm gone, give it all to him." Tina froze, not comprehending this sudden turn of events. Her eyes went wide. "Chase, it's just a breakup. Do you really have to leave the company? You've been with Hull Corp for 3 years. I cut her off. My fingers trembled slightly as I knelt down to look at the huge sunflower oil painting. I had bought it at an auction during a business trip to the US. It was an anniversary gift for Larry. I had originally wanted to hang it in our bedroom, but he said he didn't like it, so it ended up in the stairwell. He loved this artist's work. How could he not like this painting? So, it was just me that he didn't like. He hates me. I used the fact that I saved his life to chain him to me. That was my mistake. From the very beginning, I knew things with Larry would never end well. It was all a dream. For me, it was a beautiful one. But for Larry, it was a nightmare. And all dreams, sooner or later, must end. After I finished unpacking, the exhaustion of non-stop work finally caught up to me, and I fell into a deep sleep. What followed was a long, haunting dream. In the dream, I was still in college overseas. I'd pulled several all-nighters for my thesis project when I got a call from my dad. He didn't say anything new, just the usual questions. Was I eating well? Sleeping enough? How was work? The same things all parents say when they miss their kids, like a broken record. I was tired and annoyed, giving him dismissive, perfunctory answers. Then, at the end, the voice on the line changed. It was my uncle, his voice dark and hoarse, as if he'd been crying. "Chase, you need to come home. Right now. Something's happened to your father." The old, sealed-up grief and numb pain rushed through me, assaulting all my senses. The feeling of drowning washed over me, and I jolted awake, gasping for air. It was already evening. The finality of the darkness felt like it was going to swallow me whole. It left an empty, hollow feeling in my chest. You could say I was from a single-parent family. Ever since I was in high school, my mother had been cheating on my dad. She got back together with some rich kid, her old flame, and became his mistress. My childhood memories are filled with her coldness and sarcasm. She spent all her time locked in her room. She looked down on my father and she looked down on me. She believed she was meant to marry into wealth and live a life of luxury, and that my dad was a peasant trying to marry a princess. As for me, she treated me like a piece of dead flesh that had fallen from her body, utterly disgusting. I remember one year on my birthday, I actually got to eat at the same table as her. But when my father put a piece of meat on her plate, she exploded. She grabbed his shoulders, smashed a wine bottle over his head, and screamed at him, calling him disgusting, filthy, saying he had ruined her life. My father was the one being hit, but her shrill screams seemed to be protesting something else entirely, leaving me frozen in my birthday hat, completely lost. Not long after that, she ran away. My father became a ghost, wandering around looking for her every day, and eventually lost his job. At the time, I had just received a full scholarship to study in Europe. I must have been in my rebellious phase, or maybe I inherited some of my mother's disgusting nature, because I couldn't stand to see my father looking so pathetic. When he saw me off at the airport, I didn't have a single kind word for him. After that, every long-distance call he made was met with my indifferent replies. Until that last call from my uncle using his phone. He told me there had been an accident. By the time I stumbled off the plane in a daze, it was too late. All I got to see was his urn. It turned out he had finally found my mother. She had once again gotten back together with the rich kid who had dumped her when they were young. And when my father finally tracked them down, the two of them murdered him, getting rid of the burden. The rich kid's last name was Hall. He was Larry's second uncle, Gordon Hall. As a major figure in J-City, Gordon, a direct member of the family, could have crushed me like an ant. So I waited for the right moment. That day, J-City had the worst snowstorm in years. The roads were a sheet of ice, and it was nearly impossible to brake. When I saw my chance, I slammed on the gas. I cut off the car carrying the future heir of the LW Corporation, Larry Hall, whose brakes had failed. I stopped his sports car just as it was about to fly off the guardrail on the winding mountain road. I saved his life. He wanted to repay me. For 3 years, he gave me the power to get closer and closer to the company's core. He stood by while I solidified my position and then took down his own uncle, with whom he was never close. He even helped clean up the mess after I had Gordon Hall and my mother, Linda Ching, locked away in a nursing home and tortured to death. That should have been enough to repay the debt of saving his life. So he probably never expected that I had kept an ace up my sleeve. I had saved proof of his involvement in dealing with Gordon Hall. I used it to blackmail him to keep him from getting married or being with anyone else. As long as his grandfather was alive, that evidence would be a ticking time bomb hanging over Larry's head. He had no choice but to obey me to stay by my side. In the evening, the shadows of the trees in the cemetery stretched long and twisted. The autumn wind was bone-chilling. I knelt before my father's tombstone, sobbing uncontrollably. Dad, I was wrong. I'm just like her. In the end, we both went insane. Larry was busy with the project and naturally didn't notice how smoothly I was handling the work transition. Not that he would care, he'd probably applaud. I signed over all my shares back to him. I also returned the evidence I had saved all those years, along with a signed affidavit stating that the information was now void and that I, Chase, would take full responsibility for any future consequences. After all that was done, just before boarding the plane, I sent Larry one last text message. A final closing statement on 3 absurd years. Larry, I wish you all the happiness. Besides J-City, I didn't really have anywhere else to go. My aunt and uncle lived in M-City, but I rarely visited even for holidays. I just sent them money constantly, because I knew that seeing me would just make my aunt cry. But this time, Tina must have told my aunt what was going on, because in the week before I was supposed to leave J-City, she called me many times, begging me to come visit. I couldn't avoid it forever, so I went. My aunt was 6 months pregnant. I was worried that seeing me would upset her, so I made sure to visit when my uncle was home from work. But they both insisted I stay. She didn't ask a single question, but it was like she knew everything. After letting me lounge around the house for 2 days, she dropped a bombshell on me. Chase, you're not getting any younger. It's time you started thinking about getting married. I had been dozing in the sun in the courtyard. Hearing her words, a bitter smile touched my lips. Auntie, please don't try to play matchmaker. I just quit my job. What right does a broke guy like me have to think about marriage? My aunt snorted, her eyes seeing right through me. Don't give me that. You know how much money you've sent us over the years. We've saved it all. We could buy you 3 houses with it, so stop pretending to be poor. Or is it that you don't want to go on a blind date because you already like someone? Her gaze was sharp. I instinctively looked down. My aunt was pregnant. If she found out her nephew was not only gay but had been fooling around with a man for 3 years, only to end up with nothing, she would probably faint on the spot. Dad would probably be angry too wherever he was.
No, auntie.
I'll listen to you. Hearing the compliance in my voice, my aunt let out a quiet sigh of relief and continued. Do you remember the Scott family's little girl? You used to bring her over to play when you were kids. She just came back recently, too. I hear she's also working in J-City. You young people have a lot in common. You should go out, take a walk, have a chat. I didn't want her to worry, so I nodded. Okay. Meeting Jessica Scott went smoothly enough. Once she got started, she was a chatterbox who couldn't be stopped, just like when we were kids. She rambled on and on about everything that had happened over the years. As evening approached, I drove her home. Just as I was about to say goodbye, she grabbed my hand. Jessica looked like she'd summoned all her courage, keeping her head down as she held my hand. I like you. I looked down at her, the blush creeping all the way to her ears. I pursed my lips and sighed softly. Jessie, you deserve someone better. After a long moment, she finally looked up at me, tears streaming down her cheeks, her hand gripping my sleeve tightly. Listen to me, I said gently, patting the back of her hand and carefully pulling away. Go find a nice guy your own age and fall in love, Jessie. I'm not the right one for you. She pouted, her head still down, and stubbornly retorted. Why not? The words were stuck in my throat, cutting off my air, heavy and painful. Because, sweetie,
I like men.
Seeing the girl burst into tears, I patted her on the head, bent down slightly, and whispered, Can you promise me you'll keep this a secret? After all, Jessie, you're the best little sister a guy could ask for. The evening breeze swept by, rustling the hair on my forehead. After a long silence, Jessica's sobs quieted. She still looked hurt, her lips pressed together in a pout. She sniffled and said resentfully, But you're not happy, Chase. Hearing her use my name, I breathed a sigh of relief. I smiled, my eyes crinkling, and gently tucked a tear-soaked strand of hair behind her ear. As long as he's happy, that's enough. I watched Jessica go into her apartment building. Just as I turned to get in my car, I saw Larry standing not far away. I don't know how long he'd been there. He was holding a cigarette. For a moment, my mind drifted. Larry started smoking. In the 3 years we lived together, we had been intimate in every way possible in bed. But once the passion faded, all that was left was a cold, detached distance. I had always been subconsciously trying to please him. Larry hated the smell of smoke, so for 3 years, whenever I had to smoke for work, I would always air myself out completely before going home. But now he had started smoking. The cold night wind blew the maple leaves from the trees, scattering them on the ground. I snapped back to reality and was about to get in my car, but he strode forward and blocked the door with his arm. Who is she? Larry looked down at me. A little sister. I tried to duck under his arm to get into the car, but he caught me with one hand, wrapping his arm around my waist, holding me still. Chase, do I look like an idiot to you? What little sister? Larry's voice was colder than the autumn night wind. I frowned and tried to struggle out of his embrace. The more I struggled, the tighter he held me. Larry, what the hell is your problem? I didn't take the money. I gave you back the evidence. What more do you want, my life? He suddenly grabbed my shoulders, backing me up. Why? Chase, didn't you say you would never leave me? Didn't you say you would keep me by your side forever? He was holding me so tight I couldn't breathe. I stumbled and fell back into the back seat of the car. He immediately pressed in on top of me. Two tall men crammed horizontally into the car. The heat from his body was overwhelming. Don't tell me you want to get married and have kids now? Larry leaned in closer. The acrid smell of tobacco assaulted my senses, making me feel even more sober. I looked at him silently. Larry, are you getting PTSD or something? Why are you so obsessed with my life? Or are you going to tell me you've fallen in love with me? I let out a sarcastic laugh. Don't even say it. I might die laughing. His eyes tightened, and he was about to say something, but I cut him off again. It's just too ridiculous. After all, wasn't it just a few days ago that you told me I could never compare to her? His hand on my shoulder tightened unconsciously, a faint pain flaring up. The leather seats of the car were cool in the autumn night. I'm not picky about cars. As long as it runs, it's fine. Larry had given me this one. It was a makeup gift for our 1-year anniversary. I drove the black Rolls-Royce like it was a regular sedan, much to Tina's dramatic dismay that I was wasting such a beautiful machine. But to me, it was all the same. At least when I was in this car, it felt like Larry was still by my side. Chase, I won't let you leave me. Larry's eyes were locked on me, like a hungry wolf guarding its prey. His hand roamed my waist, his body pinning me to the back seat. The car suddenly felt cramped, the air thick and charged with a heavy, ambiguous energy. When I didn't answer, he lowered his head, nuzzling my neck and flicking his tongue across the corner of my mouth, like a stalking panther. Feeling him harden against me, I frowned and laughed mockingly. Larry, don't tell me you've actually turned gay. Can you only get it up for men? Before I could finish, his cool lips crushed mine. His warm, deft tongue pried my lips apart, conquering and exploring. I could taste the faint, sweet grape flavor on his tongue and suddenly remembered he had been smoking. So they were grape-flavored. On the quiet autumn street, the only sound was the wind rustling through the fallen leaves, with the occasional roar of a motorcycle speeding past. The black car, parked by the side of the road with its tinted windows, was inconspicuous, shielding us from any prying eyes. Still, every sound made my heart pound. When he finally pulled away, I gasped for breath, a feverish heat spreading through my body, making me want to squirm. Larry's hand unbuckled my belt and, ignoring my protests, slid inside my pants. As he moved his hand up and down, my mouth went dry, and a tingling numbness that made me feel like I was floating spread through me. Larry, his hand moved faster. He leaned down, using one knee to push my leg up, and lowered his head. I gasped, panting uncontrollably, and grit my teeth. Larry, are you insane? You said, you thought it was dirty. The moonlight slanted through the window, illuminating the pear tree outside. The blossoms that had flourished all summer were now quietly falling from the branches, a final burst of spring in honor of this moment. I felt completely limp, letting Larry hold me tight as he lifted me from the seat and cradled me in his arms. It's only at times like this that you're willing to call me Larry. Clang. The words exploded in my mind. His head rested in the crook of my neck, his usually cool voice now hoarse with desire. He mumbled, Chase, you promised. You'd never leave me. Larry, I will never leave you. The first year he brought me into the LW Corporation, I was desperate. I gave him the only valuable thing I had left, my promise. At first, I really did see him as my savior, my partner. I wanted to work for him, to be loyal. But somewhere along the line, that feeling twisted into something else. I started to like him, to want to possess him, to be with him, to sleep with him, recklessly, even if it meant he would hate me. For the past 3 years, all our moments of tenderness were confined to the bedroom. Outside of it, we were almost always trading insults. So now, with him leaning against me, unpeeling that old promise, it suddenly occurred to me that maybe I had done everything wrong from the start. The car was filled with a thick, sensual haze. I sighed internally, my vision slowly coming back into focus. I lifted my sore, weak arm and slowly wrapped it around his waist, pressing my cheek against his chest. I whispered, "Larry, let's do it." With the first snowfall, the chill of the autumn night was replaced by a biting cold. After that night, Larry disappeared. My inability to respond to his words was a tacit admission that my promise was no longer valid. He was never the clingy type, and even though he must have suspected this outcome, it still stung. There was a sense of loneliness. When Tina found out, she was silent on the phone for a long time before finally saying, "I have something to say, but I don't know if I should just say it. Stop wasting my time. I'm done being your lovesick guru. From now on, I'm your lovesick drill sergeant. You open your mouth with that crap, and I'm putting a bullet in it." She might have a sharp tongue, but she still told me what she had heard from her own assistant. It turned out Larry hadn't been around because the shipping project had run into trouble. He hadn't used the evidence I'd left him to pin the blame on a scapegoat. Instead, he had protected the shell company I'd set up. The government was now investigating the matter, and he was swamped, which was why he hadn't had time to come see me. It was for the best. My aunt's morning sickness had gotten worse lately, and my uncle was buried in work. As the unemployed one, I took on the role of her caregiver, making trips to the market and trying new recipes. One day, I was just leaving the market with a bag of groceries. Suddenly, a dark figure lunged at me, knocking me back a few steps. The vegetables in my bag spilled all over the ground. I frowned and looked at the person. One glance, and my body began to tremble uncontrollably. "Chase, my darling boy, you've made my life so miserable." Linda, my mother, was wearing a hospital gown, collapsed on the ground and wailing, tears streaming down her face. "You locked me in that nursing home for all these years and never once came to see me. Your father will never forgive you from beyond the grave." A crowd started to gather, drawn by the commotion. Locking his own mother in a nursing home. How cruel can you be? So much for children taking care of their parents. This one's a wolf. Look at him all dressed up and fancy, while his mother lives like this. He's no man at all. I stumbled back and sat on the ground, staring at my mother's aged face. How was this possible? How did she get out? I paid that nursing home so much money. They promised to keep her locked up for life. How could they let her escape? The crowd swirled around me, a cacophony of accusations and insults, the noise making it impossible to think. After I had killed Gordon Hall in front of her, she had gone insane. I didn't want her to die. I wanted to torture her, to keep her alive but not really living. Before I left J City, I had even gone to the nursing home to give them specific instructions one last time. How could she have been released? I hadn't seen her once in 3 years. Now, seeing her like this, in front of me, pure hatred flooded my mind. I have to kill her. Maybe if I kill her, I'll finally be free. My fingers twitched. Just as I was about to get up, a warm embrace enveloped me. "Nina told you she could set you free?" Larry held my waist, his fingers stroking my side soothingly, pulling me back from the brink. "Didn't I tell you? If you ever showed your face in front of Chase again, I would make you understand the meaning of a fate worse than death." At some point, the people Larry brought with him had dispersed the crowd. Now it was just the three of us. The moment Linda saw Larry, her expression changed. She quickly looked around for someone, but saw no one. "Looking for Nina?" Larry said, his hand still gently stroking my wrist, his eyes cold as ice as they fixed on her. Seeing her backup was gone, Linda seemed to have a sense of desperate, last-ditch courage. She looked at me and started screaming. "I told Gordon back then that we should have killed you. Too bad. Ha 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 ha, you're a lucky one having Larry protect you like this. It's disgusting, 2 men. Before she could finish, one of Larry's men chopped the back of her neck, and she crumpled to the ground, unconscious. What did that mean? What about Nina? I turned to look at Larry and saw how pale his face was. My eyes widened. What's going on? Larry, what's wrong with you? Larry had come here injured. A few days ago, outside his grandfather's hospital room, he had been shot by men sent by the Nina family. The details were unclear even to his men, so I didn't press. I let them take him to the hospital and instructed them to be on high alert. Nina was still out there, and we couldn't afford any more trouble at a time like this. I didn't tell my aunt about my mother. Larry's people had taken her away. Whether she lived or died was up to them now. There was no point in wasting any more energy on her. That evening, I was sitting by Larry's hospital bed, lost in thought. My phone on the table buzzed. It was a text from Nina. "Chase, you're not dead. What a pity. You want to know the whole story, don't you? Larry will never tell you. Come find me. If you come, I'll tell you everything." I knew she was telling the truth. With everything that had happened, if Larry wanted to tell me, he would have already. Clearly, he didn't. As I was hesitating, Nina sent an address. "You have to come alone. Otherwise, you'll never know anything." By the time I arrived that evening, Nina was already there. The streetlights in the alley were old and broken, casting only a dim, hazy glow. Nina stood under one of them, watching me. "I knew you'd come. When it comes to Larry, you always show up. You two really are a disgusting pair." I looked at her silently and chuckled. "Miss Nina, I suggest you start talking. Otherwise, you might miss your parents' chance to be reincarnated." My words were casual, but Nina's face instantly twisted. She laughed, a distorted, trembling sound, and screamed at me, "Chase, why don't you just die? Even your own mother wanted you dead." Seeing my expression change, she suddenly broke into a sarcastic, exaggerated smile. "At first, I thought Larry was actually interested in you, helping you clean up your messes, promoting you at the company, even getting rid of the people I sent to cause trouble for you. Luckily, Chase, do you have any idea how cold-blooded Larry is? We basically grew up together, and just because I stole a kiss from him, when my family's business went under and I knelt before him, begging, he didn't even blink. You think that after forcing him to be with you for 3 years, he would fall in love with you? You're dreaming." As she said this, a crazed look appeared in her eyes. I looked down. I had actually already investigated the Nina family situation over the past few days. Although some of the information had been intentionally blocked by Larry's people, I had pieced together most of the story. To be precise, it was Nina's parents who had lured my mother into getting involved with Gordon Hall. The Nina family wanted a piece of a project that Larry's grandfather was controlling, but the old man looked down on their shady business dealings. So they had to piggyback on Gordon Hall. My sudden appearance had thrown a wrench in their plans. As a last resort, Nina had tried to seduce Larry, but it had obviously failed spectacularly. "So what? You think Larry loves you? How is it? Is the Hall family mansion comfortable?" I looked at her with a half-smile, my expression as cold and distant as if I were looking at a bug that couldn't flip itself over. It was like a switch had been flipped. Nina's face contorted with rage. She looked at me with pure hatred and pulled something out of her bag. "Chase, don't get too cocky. You wanted to know how your father really died, right?" At this, she let out a triumphant laugh. Hulkily, I recorded it back then. "You have no idea what he looked like. Begging on the ground like a dog. Want to see it?" At her words, my face went pale. I glared at her, gritting my teeth. My father's body had been horrifically mutilated. It was clear he had been brutally tortured. This was a wound that had never healed. I knew she was lying, but I couldn't stand anyone even mentioning it. "Give it to me, then come and get it." Her smile was suddenly seductive. Her red lips parted as she looked at me. I knew it was a trap, but I couldn't stop myself from walking forward. She threw a disc into the air. I lunged for it, and in the next second, I saw her, just a few feet away, rushing at me with a knife. In a flash, the pain I expected never came. Someone pushed me from behind, and I fell hard to the ground. The sound of a blade sinking into flesh, mixed with a pained gasp, filled the air. I looked up in disbelief. Larry was half kneeling on the ground, blood pouring from the knife handle buried in his side. Even then, he only grimaced slightly, biting his lip to keep from making a sound. When Nina saw who it was, she realized what she'd done and scrambled to run away. I immediately rushed to Larry's side, wrapping an arm around him, my jaw tight. "Larry, what are you doing here?" With my other hand, I grabbed my phone from the ground and called an ambulance. Larry buried his head in my neck, nuzzling me out of habit. Chase, at first I hated you. I hated you for taking my kindness and throwing it back in my face. I saved you and you turned around and tried to control me. I'm the future head of the LW Corporation. I need to marry, I need to have children. But I was afraid that if I wasn't there, someone would hurt you again. I was such a coward. I took that anger out on you. Chase, you promised. You would never leave me. Larry spoke in broken sentences, his usually calm and steady voice filled with a surprising amount of hurt. I looked down, choking back a sob, and just stroked his face without saying anything. He looked up, his eyes unfocused, but trying to get one more good look at me.
Chase, I'm dying.
And you can't even say one nice thing to me. Seeing the bitter smile on his lips, I pursed mine, feeling the hot tears slide down my cheeks. My voice was hoarse. In 3 years, you never said one nice thing to me either. I did. He cut me off gently, his gaze deep and full of affection as he slowly said, I did. In every secret, silent night. The sound of sirens filled the air as Larry was loaded into the ambulance. Tina was sobbing beside me, her hand gripping my arm tightly, as if she was afraid someone else would jump out and attack me. I pulled my gaze away from the stretcher in the distance and patted Tina's arm reassuringly. I let her stay with me while I gave my statement to the police. In reality, the LW Corporation had already taken over the situation. It would be settled as a private matter, handled internally. By the time I got to the hospital, the surgery was over. Larry was awake, leaning against the bed and staring out the window. He ignored the sound of the door opening and only turned his head when he heard my voice. How are you feeling? Does it hurt? Meeting my calm gaze, he smiled.
Chase, I'm fine.
I paused, staring at my shoes for a moment before saying slowly, This is my fault. It's not your fault. Larry looked at me quietly. Chase, I'm the one who dragged you into this. The next moment, the door was thrown open. Seriously, bro, are you even trying anymore? I turned to see a handsome guy in a Hawaiian shirt and board shorts storming in. He seemed surprised to see someone else in the room. His eyes landed on me, and he raised an eyebrow before it dawned on him. You're Chase, right? I've heard so much about you. He held out his hand, and I nodded politely. Seeing my reserved attitude, he casually tried to put his arm around my shoulder. The moment his hand landed, he heard Larry cough twice. He immediately snatched his hand back, rubbing his palms together with a grin. Chase, he didn't finish. Another cold glare from Larry, and he corrected himself. What's up, Chase bro? Let me introduce myself. My name's Hall, Landon Hall. The name sounded familiar. I frowned, and in a flash, I remembered. This was Gordon Hall's illegitimate son. Landon was carrying a large plastic bag filled with coconuts. He casually took one out, stuck a straw in it, and started drinking. I'm telling you, bro, I just landed in Hainan for vacation. My ass wasn't even warm on the beach yet. I was just about to get a girl's number, and I had to fly back. You know how hard my life is? I didn't have time to buy anything else, so here, drink these coconuts. I hear coconut water builds muscle. It's good for you. Look at your scrawny ass. The gunshot wound probably hasn't even healed, and now you've got a stab wound. What's next? You gonna get drawn and quartered? A visit from Hannibal Lecter? I'm telling you, the doctor said it himself, if you keep this up, you won't live to see 40. Then who's gonna carry on the family name? Landon was still slurping on his straw, about to continue his rant, when Larry frowned and said coldly, I'm not getting married and having kids.
I like men.
Whoa, just coming out like that. I frowned at him. Our eyes met, and I saw something dark and unreadable in his gaze. I quickly looked away. Your last name is Hall too, right? You can have kids. Landon, who was still in shock, reflexively answered, I can't. Grandpa said I inherited my dad's shitty genes. I'm not suitable for procreation. His train of thought jumped quickly. He turned to me and said, Speaking of which, Chase bro, I still owe you a car. The one you used to ram my brother's car, he had me switch it out beforehand. The brake pads on that one were rusted. If you had driven it to save him, you could have easily. Landon, Shut up. Larry's voice was sharp. He glared at him, but Landon spoke so fast. The words tumbled out before he could stop them. Bro, what the hell? You scared me. What's there to shut up about? It's the truth. While I still have the money, just pick one out and I'll pay for it. Speaking of which, who was that Rolls Royce you had me research for so long for, anyway? It's weird. That Rolls Royce downstairs looks so familiar. This time, Larry couldn't take it anymore. He threw a pillow at Landon's head. The movement pulled at his wound, and he winced in pain. Are you done? If you're done, get out. Otherwise, you can forget about your bonus next year. You and all your gold-digging girlfriends can see each other in the next life. Landon looked heartbroken. He dashed to the door, but just as he was about to leave, he poked his head back in. One more thing. Spit it out. I was actually curious about Landon now, wondering what other infuriating things this kid could say to piss Larry off. He peeked through the door, his eyes darting between me and Larry, and asked hesitantly, Bro, did you and Chase bro come out? So are you the top or the bottom? With your weak-ass body right now, I don't think you can handle being the top. Seeing Larry's expression change, he quickly added, Chase bro, my brother can't take much right now. Please, for the love of God, spare his dick. With that, he slammed the door and fled. I couldn't help but laugh. The next second, Larry grabbed my wrist and pulled me into his arms. The impact against his chest made him grunt in pain. We were two big guys, after all, not some delicate girl. I immediately tried to get up, but he held me tight, refusing to let go. I could only glare at him. Be careful, I might break your weak-ass body. Hearing my deliberate emphasis, his mouth twitched. His expression shifted, but when he saw the slight smile on my lips, a faint smile appeared on his own. My body can handle it. Chase bro, please don't spare my dick. I found it hilarious. I was about to turn and look at him, but as I lowered my head, my lips brushed against his palm. His fingers instinctively stroked my lips a couple of times before he casually pulled his hand back. I froze, my heart feeling like it had sped up. It took me a few seconds to compose myself, and I changed the subject. What did Landon mean? You knew all along that I set up that rescue. Then why did you still help me? I killed his father. Our two sentences were completely unrelated, but I knew he would understand what I meant. After working together for so many years, our unspoken understanding was a given. Landon is an illegitimate son. If I hadn't brought him back, Gordon Hall would have never acknowledged him. So he doesn't hate you. In fact, he's grateful to you. That kid got kicked in the head by a donkey when he was young, and it knocked his brain out, so his communication skills aren't great. You don't have to listen to what he... I pursed my lips, staring down at my waist where his arm was wrapped around me, and said softly, Larry, I want the truth. Larry paused. His gaze lowered, his hand gently rubbing my stomach, his cheek pressed against my back. He sighed. I did know from the beginning. I've never been a particularly kind person. If things hadn't gone wrong, I probably would have let Gordon Hall live out his days as a useless parasite with a bonus, even if he was an asshole. After all, the old man values family and blood ties above all else. It's just that, the moment I saw you, my heart inexplicably softened. The funny thing is, after all that, all I gave you were cruel words. I felt a warm wetness on my back. I tensed. Was Larry crying? Don't say that. Larry, you saved me. We should be even now. I turned around and saw that Larry's eyes were red. He was looking down, lost in thought. His pale face was emotionless, and in the hospital gown, covered in injuries, he looked incredibly fragile. I couldn't bear to look at him like this anymore. I was afraid that if I stayed any longer, my resolve would crumble. I loved Larry so much. Even after 3 years of his verbal abuse, I still loved him. Because it all started with me. I was the one who used underhanded means to tie him to me, so it was only right that he hated me. But I couldn't stand to see him sad. As I turned to leave, I heard a rustling sound behind me. Before I could take a step, my wrist was grabbed, and something was pressed into my hand. I looked back to see a piece of paper. He called out to me, Chase, I don't want... I don't want to be even with you. I've transferred all my shares and assets to your name. I don't know how else to make you stay, but I thought, you need me to manage the LW corporation for you, right? That way we can't be separated. Let Larry manage the LW corporation for me? I froze, instinctively trying to give the paper back, but he looked at me with a determined gaze, his voice filled with endless tenderness. So, this time I'm not asking you to love me. Chase, I'm just asking you. Will you let me be your lover? I smiled helplessly, a soft, resigned smile, and sighed, burying my face in his neck. Larry, I promise I'll fall in love with you. After all, you know the readers all hate you. Larry smiled, his eyes crinkling with a gentle warmth. He leaned in and softly kissed the corner of my mouth. Let them curse me out. Who cares? They're your family after all.